Today, we're taking a look at the most unhinged, destructive job that Bravely Default 2 has to offer, the Arcanist. The Arcanist prides itself on being that one person who just wants to watch the world burn, with all of its immensely powerful magic catching everyone, including themselves, in the crossfire. The Arcanist has access to every element in the game in the form of strong, party-wide spells that deal massive damage, but at the cost of also hurting the Arcanists themselves and their team. So you need to either have a contingency plan after each cast, or a burly healer on standby. But let's go ahead and dive into the Arcanist's specialties, starting with All In. This specialty will not reduce the damage potency of any attack spells when hitting multiple targets, but the catch is that the spell cast will also harm the Arcanist. All In immediately shifts the Arcanist's priorities in fights more than any other damage dealer, as you'll need to consider that each action you perform will have some kind of backfire effect. To properly handle this, I personally recommend having either some elemental talismans equipped on your Arcanist to at least mitigate any damage of a specific element, or have an oracle beef up your resistances to certain elements. A strong enough magic defense stat can also allow you to just face tank your own magic, no matter how strong it is. So that is also on the table. Because of how many ways there are to reduce the impact of All In's main damage drawback, this specialty honestly becomes a net gain overall. Next is Wild Wizardry, which will increase the potency of attack spells by 20% and will lower the MP of any targets hit. This very powerful specialty also comes with a backfire effect, as the Arcanist's magic can also end up targeting everyone on the field, enemies and allies alike, which could mean some of your friends get caught on the receiving end of a nuke that wasn't meant for them. Because this is up to chance and not something you can just fully remove from the Arcanist's kit, playing around Wild Wizardry becomes somewhat important, and the means to do so are basically the same as All In, just for the entire party instead. This means that building your entire team around preventing the drawbacks of Wild Wizardry should, in theory, help the Arcanist to deal with future issues from All In or any of their other magic backfires. The Arcanist's special move is Black Mass. Black Mass is a powerful, darkness-based magic attack on all enemies with the bonus effect of increasing the party's restorative power by 30%. Strong spell that you'll get often enough, so you don't need to worry about saving it, with the added cheeky bonus of making it easier to heal your wounds from any and all spells that you intend to cast. Seriously, very, very clever idea. Now we move on to the Arcanist's combat abilities, starting with Dark, Darkra, Darkga, and Doomsday. The three dark spells are similar to any other elemental spell set in the game, with each spell being stronger and costing more than the last. Thanks to All In, you won't need to worry about damage drop-off at all on these spells, so small packs of enemies can become easy pickings for you, especially if you have the preventative measures in place to keep your Arcanist alive. Doomsday is the strongest version of the Arcanist's dark spells, but it only focuses on a single target initially, so it is more often used in fights against bosses or tanky mobs. Next is Ardor, Electun, Meltdown, and Apocalypse. Each of these abilities are massive spells that hit all enemies and allies at once with a mix of two specified elements. Ardor mixes fire and water together, Electun mixes lightning and light, Meltdown with fire and wind, and Apocalypse with earth and dark. With these four spells, the Arcanist can effectively hit any elemental weakness in the game, and the latter two spells, Meltdown and Apocalypse, can really pack quite the punch. Be sure when planning to use these spells to adhere to what I've mentioned earlier, and have something in place ready to help your team recover or prevent damage, or else the Arcanist might be sending you and your enemies to an early grave. One last thing to remember is that if your targets are immune to one of the elements in either of these casts, the entire spell will be nullified. So be sure that you know what kind of enemy you're fighting ahead of time to avoid wasted MP. Next up is Drain and a Spear. These two actions take a chunk of either HP or MP from a target and give it back to the user, with Drain being HP and a Spear being MP. Use these as a means of keeping your Arcanist alive if they find themselves in a pickle, or to regain precious MP without relying on items or other party members to do the dirty work for you. Just be sure not to use any of these actions against undead foes, however, or it'll backfire on you, like every other ability in the Arcanist's kit. Next is Death. As the name might suggest, this spell has the Arcanist attempt to insta-kill their targets. There are quite a few enemies that are surprisingly immune to instant death, but it can be really funny when this lands against something, even if it's something you might not expect it to. And last up for combat abilities is Comet and Meteor. Comet will perform up to 4 weak non-elemental magic attacks on a single target, dealing decent damage. Meteor, on the other hand, will always deal 4 powerful non-elemental magic attacks to random enemies, dishing out some insane damage numbers, especially if every meteor hits the same enemy. Because both of these spells don't fall into any elemental category, they're non-elemental spells after all, you can use these spells when an enemy doesn't have an inherent weakness and still do some pretty crazy damage. With combat abilities out of the way, we can now move on to support abilities, starting with MP Regen. At the end of the user's turn, they will restore 5% of their maximum MP. This is honestly not that bad, as 5% of your max MP is honestly pretty good at higher levels, where you'll more often than not have close to 1000 maximum MP, making it to where you can restore 50 MP passively every turn. That adds up really fast in a drawn-out fight, and might be enough to sustain your mana for whole encounters. Second and lastly is Magic Amp. This passive will increase the power of magic spells by 25%, but at the cost of increasing the price of said magic spells by 50%. The idea with this one is to not let anything live long enough for you to feel that steep jump in price. But do remember that the Arcanist has built-in ways of keeping their mana topped up, handing you a spear, so this honestly isn't that big of a deal. The Arcanist is like a one-man show, and everything in its disposal can, and probably will, be used against all players on the field at one point or another. And don't get me wrong, the Arcanist is very, very good at what it does, but even something as destructive as an Arcanist still has room for improvement. My choices for sub-jobs this time around are mostly built around giving your Arcanist an extra edge in battle, as I personally tend to put any defense prep in the hands of either the gear my team wears or other party members' jobs. Now, the Black Mage is a pretty good sub-job choice, mainly for its specialty high-velocity spells, as it'll keep those pesky elemental immunities from getting in the way of your desired mayhem. Having access to more basic magics that don't have any extra strings attached, along with poison fishing, doesn't hurt either. The Red Mage's Chain spell is valuable for letting the Arcanist to dish out more damage, and Nuisance can let the Arcanist attempt to inflict various ailments, especially since they have access to every element in the game with their base kit. More casts with more chances to land some nasty debuffs could be a cool secondary DPS role in a party. The Pictomancer allows the Arcanist to set up their own buffs or debuffs, and Splatter gives the Arcanist access to Daub, which in turn lets the job do even more damage. And if worst comes to worst, the Arcanist can fall back and be a full-on support for their party in cases that their wild magics might get in the way of a close victory. And the Oracle is pretty simple, as Elemental Impairment, Supplement, and Ward will all feel right at home with the Arcanist, as they help provide a means of dealing more damage while also combating any backfire damage. The In One's Element specialty is also a huge damage increase for the Arcanist. The Arcanist is a selfish, self-destructive job that is incredibly fun to teeter between life and death with. Will you be able to get that one extra cast off to kill the boss without it backfiring so hard it wipes your team? Even if you aren't interested in gambling with your party's lives every time you cast a simple dark spell, creating an entire setup around an Arcanist can be super fun, and really feel like your party is coming together for a singular purpose, sending your enemies to hell. Because of this, I have to give the job points for feeling very, very different from other jobs out there, and in fact feels more like a gambling job than the actual gambler at times. But if you aren't interested in building your whole party around a single idea, or wishing to gamble your life with each cast, then this job is definitely not for you. The Arcanist isn't a team player, and because of that, it oftentimes can make it bad for suppression. But trust me, this is a really, really cool job, and if you're looking to do a replay through with jobs you may have passed up initially, try the Arcanist, it might surprise you. And finally, we've arrived at the fashion tier list. Now, overall, I really do like the gothic aesthetic that the Arcanist has going for it, with the added iconic mad scientist goggles added onto it. And I do find it quite fitting that the first thing on my mind when looking at this job's design is the Frankenstein novel, especially with the original asterisk holder being undead and also sort of a mad scientist. I do have to say that I do prefer the goggles being on the hat and not being worn, however, and I honestly don't know why. It just looks better. And speaking of the hats, These lanky, bouncing dark hats with candles on them are super cool. I want one myself. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Easily my favorite part of the job. I do think that, however, these job outfits are a little too similar across the board for each party member, and I do wish that the devs kept their original idea of giving each party member slightly different colors for their feathers and cloaks, seen here in concept art. Though it's still a decent set all around.